Vera stood at the edge of the training arena, her eyes scanning the humans in their heavy armor. She was only 18, but she had already earned a reputation among her people as a skilled fighter. The HFY, her race, were known for their speed, agility, and natural strength. They moved like shadows, graceful and lethal. But when she looked at the humans, encased in their clunky metal suits, she couldn't help but laugh. "Look at them," she muttered to herself, crossing her arms over her chest. The so-called warriors of this galaxy, hiding behind their metal shells. The humans around her were busy in the training yard, their armor making them look awkward and stiff. Their movements were slow, cumbersome compared to the HFY. Vera had seen enough. She turned to her closest friend, Kalen, a fellow HFY who shared her opinion of the humans. "They think they can challenge us with those suits," Vera said with a smirk. "It's laughable." Kalen chuckled. "They're just hiding their weakness. They need technology to fight, while we don't." Vera's eyes narrowed. "It's time to teach them a lesson. I'll challenge one of them to a duel." Kalen raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure about this? You've seen how big and heavy their suits are. They don't move like we do." Vera scoffed. "That's the point. They might be strong with their armor, but without it, they're nothing. I'll show them how it's done." Without waiting for Kalen's response, Vera walked to the center of the arena, her long, sharp features glowing in the dim lights. She called out, her voice carrying across the room. "Human, I challenge you." The humans around her stopped talking, and all eyes turned to her. A few snickers could be heard as the group looked at her slender form, her blue skin shimmering with an almost ethereal glow. She was almost half the size of some of the armored humans, but her confidence was unshakable. One of the humans, a soldier with short black hair and a strong jaw, stepped forward. His name was Ross, and he had been part of the Earth military for years. He looked at Vera, sizing her up. His eyes scanned her, amused by her boldness. He had seen many aliens before, but none quite like her. She looked like she could be quick and nimble, but she would never be able to match the power of a human in a suit. He raised an eyebrow. "You're serious?" "Absolutely," Vera replied with a smirk. "I'll show you how a true warrior fights, without needing any fancy armor." Ross chuckled. "You're brave, I'll give you that. But you don't know what you're asking for. My suit is built to handle combat situations. You'll regret this." Vera didn't flinch. "You'll regret underestimating me." With that, the challenge was set. The rest of the humans gathered around, curious to see the outcome of the strange duel. Ross slowly walked to the equipment area, his movements steady and calculated. He pulled on his heavy combat suit, the clanking of metal echoing through the arena. The armor, thick and bulky, covered every inch of his body. It was built to withstand enemy fire, protect the wearer from injury, and give them superior strength. Vera didn't even blink as Ross finished suiting up. She was used to seeing the bulky, clumsy look of the human armor. It didn't scare her. In fact, she was more excited than anything. She knew this would be easy. The armor may have been strong, but it was just a machine. She was living, breathing power, and no suit could ever match her raw skill. Ross stepped into the arena, his footsteps heavy, echoing through the silence. He nodded at her. "Let's get this over with." Vera wasted no time. She darted forward, her body a blur of motion. She moved faster than Ross could blink, aiming a quick strike at his chest. But Ross, despite the bulk of his armor, reacted faster than she expected. He raised his arm, and her punch hit his gauntlet with a sharp clang. The impact stung, but it didn't seem to faze him. Vera quickly backed off, confused. She had expected to feel more resistance. The armor should have slowed him down, made him vulnerable. But he was moving, not as fast as her, but still with surprising agility for someone in such heavy gear. Ross gave a small smile behind his helmet. "Not bad, but you'll need more than that." Vera snarled and rushed at him again. She was quick, attacking from all angles, trying to find a weakness in the armor. She struck at his joints, his legs, his sides, but every time her strikes hit, they bounced off, barely leaving a mark. The metal suit absorbed the blows effortlessly. Meanwhile, Ross seemed unfazed, his movements measured and precise. He blocked each of her strikes with ease, his body protected by the suit's reinforced plating. He wasn't even out of breath. Vira's frustration grew. She wasn't used to being outmatched. She tried to feint, to confuse him, but Ross was always one step ahead. Her attacks became more erratic, her movements slower as her energy drained. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Vera stepped back, panting. Ross didn't look tired at all. He stood there, waiting for her to make the next move, his stance calm and controlled. "You're quick," he said, his voice low and steady. "But speed alone won't win you this fight." Vera gritted her teeth, staring at him. She had never felt so humiliated. She was supposed to be the superior fighter, the one who didn't need fancy technology. But here she was, struggling against someone in a bulky, slow suit. She wasn't done yet. She wouldn't admit defeat. Not yet. But she knew one thing for sure. This battle wasn't going the way she had planned. Vera stood in the center of the arena, glaring at Ross. Sweat trickled down her forehead as she tried to catch her breath. She had never encountered a challenge like this before. She was fast, agile, and skilled in combat, but against Ross in that heavy suit, her abilities felt useless. She was a blur of movement, but the suit absorbed her every strike, leaving her with nothing but frustration. Ross stood a few paces away, seemingly unaffected by the battle. His body was encased in the heavy armor, yet he didn't even seem out of breath. His stance was calm and controlled, his hands loosely resting by his sides, as if he were merely observing the child's game. The armor didn't seem to slow him down in the slightest. Vera clenched her fists. "Why won't you fall?" She thought angrily. She had struck his joints, his sides, and even the back of his knees, but none of it worked. The suit was too strong. She darted forward again, but this time she adjusted her strategy. She would wear him down. Her strikes became sharper and quicker, trying to find an opening. She feinted left, then lunged right, hoping to catch him off guard. Ross didn't flinch. Instead, he raised his left arm to block her blow, pushing her back with minimal effort. Vira's feet slid back, and she nearly stumbled. She gritted her teeth, refusing to show any weakness. "You're fast, I'll give you that," Ross said, his voice calm. "But you've got to do more than that to take me down." Vira stepped back, taking a breath. The crowd of humans and Silari around the arena watched in silence, unsure of how to react. It wasn't common to see a Silari warrior struggle, especially in front of a human. The atmosphere felt tense as all eyes focused on Vera, who was now more determined than ever. She darted again, aiming for his legs this time. She moved so quickly that she almost seemed to disappear, but just as she was about to land a blow, Ross shifted his weight and twisted his body, redirecting her strike. His helmet tilted slightly, as if he was studying her. Vira's frustration grew, but she kept her mind sharp. She couldn't afford to get careless. She changed her approach. Instead of rushing in, she slowed down, watching for any mistake he might make. But Ross made no mistakes. His movements were precise, each one calculated to either block or dodge her attacks. He didn't overexert himself. Instead, he used the power of his suit to stay one step ahead. She was running out of ideas, and every time she attacked, it felt like she was wasting her energy. She could feel her speed beginning to slow, her movements growing heavier. The suit Ross wore seemed to protect him, and he barely seemed to tire. Vera's muscles burned with effort, but she refused to back down. "Why aren't you fighting back?" Vera spat. "Are you too afraid?" Ross tilted his helmeted head slightly, as if amused. "I don't need to fight back right now. You're doing all the work for me." That struck a nerve. Vera's eyes narrowed. She wasn't going to let him taunt her anymore. She rushed in again, faster than before, aiming to strike his chest. This time, she was fully committed. Her footwork was sharper, her strikes aimed with more precision. Ross raised his arm again to block, but Vira had already anticipated it. She spun mid-air and aimed a quick jab toward his side, targeting the gap between his armor's plates. For a moment, she thought she had him. But at the last second, Ross shifted his torso just enough to deflect the blow. Vira landed on the ground, frustrated and out of breath. She stood up quickly, but her legs felt heavier now. She could feel the burn in her muscles, the fatigue creeping in. Her breath was ragged. She had to admit it. Ross wasn't just strong, he was skilled. The suit was an advantage, yes, but he knew how to use it well. His body was still the one doing the work, using the armor to enhance his natural strength and speed. "I'm not done yet," Vira said between breaths. "I won't lose to you." Ross didn't respond at first, but his posture softened, and he looked at her with something like respect in his eyes. "I'm not here to make you lose," he said quietly. "I'm just trying to show you something." Vera stared at him, unsure of what he meant. She had been so focused on proving herself, on showing him that the Xelari were superior, that she hadn't considered that maybe, just maybe, there was more to strength than speed alone. "I've fought like this before," Ross continued. "I've trained in these suits for years. But I'm not hiding behind it. The armor is just a tool. It's not what makes me strong. Strength comes from inside. It's the will to keep going even when you're exhausted." Vera blinked, taken aback. The words echoed in her mind. She had always believed that natural ability was the key, that her speed and agility would make her unbeatable. But Ross was telling her something different. He wasn't just relying on the armor. He was relying on something else, something deeper. She stood still for a moment, absorbing his words. She felt a shift inside her, something she hadn't expected. Ross wasn't just an opponent. He was a teacher, showing her a new perspective on strength. And as much as it stung, she realized he was right. Vera clenched her fists again, feeling the new sense of determination filled her. She would continue. She would find her own way to overcome this challenge. But this time, she wouldn't just rely on her speed. She would fight with everything she had. "I'm not finished yet," she said, her voice steady now. "I'll show you what true strength is. You haven't seen the last of me." Ross nodded, his expression still calm. "I wouldn't expect anything less." And with that, Vera prepared herself for the next round. She had learned something new. And now she was ready to face Ross again, this time, with a different approach. Vera stood silently in the middle of the arena, her muscles aching, her breath still heavy from the intense battle. Her mind was racing, trying to process everything that had just happened. Ross hadn't just been stronger. He had been smarter, more focused. It wasn't just the armor. He was using the suit like it was an extension of his body, making every move with purpose. The crowd around the arena was still, watching closely. Even some of the Xelari seemed to be reconsidering their opinions. The young warriors who had once laughed at the idea of human soldiers now watched with respect. They saw Vira's struggle, and they saw Ross's calm control. Something had shifted, something Vira had never imagined. Ross stood a few paces away, his stance relaxed, his heavy armor barely making a sound as he shifted his weight. His helmet glinted in the low light of the arena, and he tilted his head slightly as if waiting for Vera to make the next move. He had shown no signs of tiring, and that made Vera question her own abilities. She felt the sting of her pride, but she pushed it aside. It was time for a change. She had to rethink everything. "Are you ready?" Ross's voice echoed through the arena, calm and collected, as if he were just talking about the weather. Vira didn't respond right away. She closed her eyes, taking a few deep breaths. She had always prided herself on being fast, always quick to act. But she now realized that speed alone wouldn't win the battle. Ross wasn't fighting just with his body. He was fighting with his mind. The suit was just a tool, but his focus, his ability to remain calm, was what truly gave him an edge. "I'm ready," she finally said, her voice steady. She opened her eyes, looking directly at Ross. For the first time in the battle, she wasn't focused on beating him. Now she was focused on learning, on understanding what made him so strong. Vera moved forward slowly, more deliberate this time. She wasn't rushing to attack, but instead studying every movement Ross made. She noticed how he kept his posture balanced, how every step was calculated. He was no longer just a target to defeat. He was a puzzle to solve. Ross didn't move at first. He watched her, his helmet giving nothing away. Vera's eyes flicked to the gap between his arm and his body. She had been trying to strike there earlier, but she knew it wouldn't be that easy. This time, she decided to test his patience. She feinted left, then darted right, trying to see if she could trick him into making a move. Ross shifted his weight but didn't take the bait. He stayed where he was, his stance unwavering. Vera's heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. It wasn't about rushing in. It was about finding the right moment. She circled him, keeping a safe distance, watching closely for any sign of weakness. Ross's eyes followed her, his posture relaxed but alert. She couldn't help but admire his control. It was as if he had no fear, no doubt that he would succeed. It was something she had never felt. No matter how confident she was, there was always a little voice in the back of her mind telling her to be careful. But Ross seemed to have mastered that fear, turning it into confidence. Then, without warning, Vera lunged forward. She aimed for his right side, the gap she had seen earlier. This time, she wasn't trying to strike directly. Instead, she aimed to move around him, to confuse him. Ross reacted quickly, raising his arm to block. But Vera was already in motion. She ducked under his arm, using her momentum to slip past him and land behind him. The crowd gasped in surprise, and Vera's heart raced with excitement. She had done it. For the first time in the battle, she had managed to slip past Ross's defenses. But just as quickly, Ross turned around, moving with surprising speed for someone in such heavy armor. His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist before she could react. He had anticipated her move and countered it flawlessly. He didn't even seem winded. Vera struggled for a moment, but Ross's grip was unyielding. He didn't apply force to hurt her. He just held her firmly, keeping her in place. "That was better," Ross said, his voice calm, almost encouraging. "But you're still rushing. You have the right idea, but you need to control the pace." Vera's heart pounded in her chest. He wasn't just beating her. He was teaching her, showing her a better way to fight. It was frustrating, but it was also something she couldn't ignore. Every time she tried to outpace him, Ross simply outthought her. He knew how to make the most of every movement, every second. Vera took a deep breath, her mind racing. She hadn't come here to just lose. She had come to prove something, to show that the Xelari were the greatest warriors in the galaxy. But now, her perspective was changing. It wasn't just about proving superiority. It was about understanding what made others strong. And right now, Ross was showing her a strength that was deeper than speed or skill. It was the strength of the mind, the strength of staying calm under pressure. She stopped struggling in his grip and looked him in the eyes. "I'm listening," she said, her voice steady now. "Show me how to be better." Ross's grip loosened, and he stepped back, giving her space. It's not about trying to win in one move. It's about control. You need to learn how to fight with patience, to make your opponent move the way you want. Vera nodded slowly. It made sense. She had always been quick to attack, quick to act, but she had never really thought about how to make her opponent play into her hands. Ross was calm, he was patient, and that was what made him so difficult to beat. "Okay," Vera said, taking a fighting stance. "I'm ready." This time, Ross didn't wait for her to make the first move. He stepped forward, his movements slow and measured. Vera followed his lead, mirroring his movements, trying to match his control. It was a new way of fighting, one she wasn't used to. But with every step, she could feel herself improving. The arena was silent except for the sound of their movements. This wasn't just a fight anymore. It was a lesson, and Vera was determined to learn. Vera stood in front of Ross, her mind buzzing with everything she had just learned. The sweat on her forehead had cooled, and her breath had returned to normal. They had spent the last few minutes circling each other, testing moves, and watching carefully. She had begun to understand the lesson he was teaching her. Strength was not just about speed or skill, it was about control and timing. Ross had slowed down his pace. He was no longer the fierce warrior she had once seen in the arena, but a patient teacher, guiding her with every move. Vera had been so focused on winning, on proving that the Xelari were the greatest, that she had forgotten the most important part of combat: understanding your opponent and yourself. She took a deep breath, adjusting her stance. Her body felt lighter now, less tense, and her mind was clearer. This fight was no longer about winning. It was about growing. Ross tilted his head, his eyes locked on hers. "Are you ready to continue?" Vera nodded. "I'm ready." Ross didn't rush. He didn't charge at her or try to overpower her. Instead, he moved slowly, his movements calculated, his armor making only the faintest sound with every step. He was leading the way, showing Vera how to move with intention and precision. She watched him closely, mirroring his steps, trying to match his calm. Ross stepped forward, then quickly stepped back, drawing her in. Vera reacted instinctively, trying to catch him with a quick strike, but Ross sidestepped effortlessly, leaving her to strike at nothing but air. He had already anticipated her move. Vera grinned. "You're fast, I'll give you that." "Not fast," Ross said, his voice calm. "Just paying attention." He waited for her to make the next move. Vera took a step back, thinking carefully. She couldn't just act on instinct anymore. She had to be smarter. She feinted to the left and then dashed to the right, trying to confuse him. But Ross was already moving, adjusting to her change in direction before she even reached him. "Your instincts are good," Ross said, "but don't rely only on them. Think ahead. See the moves before they happen." Vera paused, letting his words sink in. She had always relied on her quick reactions, her speed. She was the first to strike, the first to act. But Ross was showing her a different way. It was about strategy, not just the rush of the moment. She took a few more seconds, then made her move. This time, she didn't rush. She moved forward, deliberately. She aimed for his right shoulder, but at the last second, she shifted her body and aimed for his side instead. It wasn't fast or flashy, but it was clever. She had forced him to react, forcing him into a position where she could take advantage. Ross raised his arm just in time, blocking her attack with ease, but Vera could see it in his eyes. He hadn't been able to predict it. For a moment, she had caught him off guard. "That was different," Ross said, sounding impressed. "Better. You're thinking more now." Vera's heart raced. This was it. This was the change she had been looking for. She wasn't just reacting anymore. She was in control of the fight, making her opponent respond to her. She pressed on, testing Ross's defenses. She made another move, aiming low this time. She shifted her weight quickly, striking at his legs. Ross saw it coming, but Vera had already set him up. He stepped back to avoid the blow, but by then, she was already moving again, using her momentum to spin and aim for his upper body. Ross didn't try to block her immediately. Instead, he raised his arm to guard himself, allowing her to land a light strike on his chest. The hit wasn't powerful enough to do any real damage, but it was the first time she had managed to land a clean hit. Vera stepped back, breathing hard. She didn't feel like celebrating the hit, though. It was just one small step. It wasn't the victory she had imagined, but it was progress. Real progress. Ross nodded. "Good. That's the kind of thinking I'm talking about. But don't get distracted. It's not over yet." Vera grinned. "I'm not done." She circled around him again, trying to stay focused. The more she thought about his words, the clearer the fight became. She could feel the shift in her own style. She wasn't just rushing in anymore. She was thinking, reacting, and adapting. It was a new way of fighting, and it was starting to feel natural. Ross stayed patient, watching her every move. He wasn't trying to push her too hard. He was letting her figure it out, step by step. He had no need to prove anything to her anymore. He was simply sharing his knowledge, helping her grow. Vira suddenly darted forward again, this time aiming for his head. But before she reached him, she used her legs to launch herself higher into the air, flipping over him. It wasn't a move Ross had expected, and it gave her a moment of advantage. She landed behind him, feet planted firmly on the ground. Ross turned around quickly, but Vera was already on the move, using his momentary confusion to strike at his back. She pushed forward, this time with even more confidence. Ross was quick to react, but for once, she felt like she was a step ahead. But then, just as she moved in for the final strike, Ross shifted his weight, turning and blocking her arm. He had expected her to be more predictable, but this time, Vera's unpredictability caught him off guard. "Good," Ross said, his voice filled with approval. "You're thinking like a fighter now." Vera stood still, a smile playing on her lips. She was breathing a little faster, but she didn't mind. She had learned something important. She had learned how to slow down and make each move count. "Thank you," she said, her voice calm but filled with gratitude. Ross gave a small nod. "You're welcome. But remember, this is just the beginning. Strength isn't about overpowering your opponent. It's about outthinking them, staying one step ahead." Vera nodded, feeling the new sense of respect for him. She had come into this fight thinking she would teach him something. But now, she understood that she had learned far more from him than she could have ever imagined. As they both took a few steps back, the crowd around the arena began to applaud. The Exilari and the humans watched as two warriors, from different worlds, stood side by side, both stronger in their own way. And for the first time, Vera wasn't thinking about how to beat Ross. She was thinking about how far she had come. The next day, Vera woke up to the bright sun shining through the window of the small room where she had been resting. She stretched her arms above her head, feeling the soreness in her muscles from the previous day's fight. Her body ached, but she knew it was a good kind of pain. It meant she was improving, learning, and growing stronger. She stood up, pulling on her clothes. The lesson from yesterday was still fresh in her mind. Ross had taught her something important. True strength wasn't just about how fast or hard you could fight. It was about control, timing, and waiting for the right moment. She had learned how to make her opponent react to her, instead of always rushing in. Today, she would test what she had learned. Vira made her way out of the room and into the training area, where Ross was already waiting. His armor was gleaming in the sunlight, his posture calm and ready. He didn't speak as she approached, only nodded to acknowledge her presence. "Are you ready for today's lesson?" Ross asked, his voice steady. Vira smiled, feeling the surge of confidence. "I'm ready." They began their warm-up, moving through the basic stances and drills. It was important to keep their bodies in shape, to build strength and endurance for the real challenges ahead. But today, Vera's mind was focused. She had learned from yesterday, and she was determined to put her knowledge into action. After the warm-up, Ross stepped back and signaled for the fight to begin. Vera immediately adopted a more cautious stance than she had the day before. She wasn't going to rush in this time. She was going to wait, to watch, and to learn. Ross moved first, his steps quiet but powerful. He charged at her with surprising speed, his heavy armor making him look like an unstoppable force. Vera didn't panic. She didn't try to meet his charge with speed or force. Instead, she waited until the last second, then sidestepped quickly to the left. Ross missed her by inches, his armor clanging as he tried to correct his path. Vira didn't stop there. She quickly spun and struck out with her leg, aiming for his side. Ross blocked the attack easily, but Vera could see the slight shift in his posture. She had caught him off guard. "Not bad," Ross said, straightening his stance. "You're starting to think." Vyred didn't answer right away. She was focused on her next move. Ross was already shifting his weight, preparing for another strike. This time, Vera didn't wait for him to come to her. She moved first, testing his reaction. She feinted to the right, then quickly moved to his left. Ross didn't flinch, but he had to adjust his position to block her. It was exactly what she wanted. She wasn't trying to land a blow. She was forcing him to move, to react, to adjust. She was setting the rhythm. The fight went on like this for several more minutes. Vera used her new tactics to keep Ross off balance, never staying in one place for too long. She wasn't looking for a quick win. She was learning how to move with the flow of the fight. Ross's armor was heavy, but he was fast and precise. He wasn't making any mistakes, but Vera was beginning to see the patterns in his movements. "Your moves are getting sharper," Ross said, his tone approving. "You're not just reacting anymore. You're anticipating." Vera felt a rush of pride at his words, but she didn't let it distract her. She kept her focus sharp, knowing that she still had a lot to learn. This wasn't just about outsmarting Ross. It was about mastering herself, mastering her body, her mind, and her instincts. Ross stepped back, suddenly stopping the fight. Vera paused, waiting for him to speak. She was breathing heavily, her body exhausted from the effort. "You're doing well," Ross said, taking off his helmet and revealing his face. His eyes were serious but kind. "But now comes the hardest part. You've learned to control your actions, but you need to learn how to control your emotions. Anger, fear, frustration, they can cloud your judgment. They can make you reckless. And that's when you lose." Vera nodded, listening carefully. She had felt those emotions before, during battles and during moments of pressure. The anger when she was pushed too hard. The fear when she thought she might fail. It was hard to stay calm when everything seemed so chaotic. But Ross was right. If she wanted to be truly strong, she needed to control herself, not just her opponent. "Is that why you're so calm?" Vera asked, curious. Ross smiled slightly. "It's not about being calm all the time. It's about being able to find that calm in the middle of a storm. When everything is chaotic, that's when you have to be at your sharpest." Vera thought about his words as they continued their break. She realized that in the heat of battle, it was easy to get caught up in the rush of emotions. But controlling her emotions would give her an edge that others wouldn't have. It wasn't just about fighting. It was about understanding herself and her limits. "Okay, Ross," Vera said after a moment, standing up straighter. "Let's keep going. I want to learn more." Ross raised an eyebrow. "You're not tired?" Vera shook her head. "I'm not done yet." And so, they continued. The fight went on for hours, with Vera learning more and more with every exchange. She grew stronger, faster, and smarter. Every time she thought she had figured it out, Ross would challenge her again, pushing her to think deeper, to be more creative, and to control not only her body but also her mind. At the end of the day, both warriors were exhausted. Vera's body ached, but she felt something she hadn't felt before, a sense of pride in how far she had come. She wasn't the same fighter she had been when she first arrived. She had learned how to control her mind and body, how to read her opponent, and how to stay focused when everything around her was chaos. Ross stood beside her, looking out over the horizon. "You've come a long way, Vera," he said, "but this is just the beginning. There's always more to learn, always more to become. Keep pushing forward." Vera nodded, feeling the weight of his words. The journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the training ground. Vera stood at the edge of the arena, her body still sore from the intense training. She had been working for days, pushing herself harder with each lesson. But today was different. Today, Ross had promised something more. He had told her it was time for a test. Vera's heart beat faster as she looked around. The familiar training space now felt different. charge, almost electric. Today wasn't about learning new moves or improving technique. Today, she would be tested on everything she had learned so far. Ross approached her slowly, his armor now fully suited up. He had a serious look on his face, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. There was no sign of humor, no teasing. This wasn't a game. This was the real deal. Today, you'll face a challenge, Ross said, his voice calm but firm. I'm going to test everything. Your control, your mind, your body. It won't be easy. Vera nodded, feeling a sense of both excitement and nervousness. She had prepared for this moment, but there was always that lingering doubt. Could she do it? Was she truly ready for the test? Ross stepped back, raising a hand and signaling for the test to begin. Without a word, he charged at her. The air seemed to crackle with the energy of his sudden movement. He moved with precision and power, his armor clanking as he closed the distance. Vira's mind raced. This wasn't like their previous sparring matches. He wasn't holding back now. She had to react quickly, stay calm, and control the situation. She sidestepped, narrowly avoiding his strike. She could feel the rush of air as his fist passed close to her face. She didn't let herself panic. She focused on his movements, watching for patterns. She wasn't just reacting anymore. She was trying to predict his next move. Ross didn't stop. He pivoted and swung again. But this time, Vera was ready. She ducked, letting the strike fly over her head, and countered with a low kick to his leg. He blocked it effortlessly, but she wasn't looking to land the blow. She was testing his defense, trying to see how he would respond. For a moment, they were locked in a fast-paced dance. Vera's mind was sharp, her movements more controlled than ever before. She had learned to control her fear, her anger, and her impatience. She was focused, calm in the face of Ross's relentless attacks. But Ross was relentless. He kept coming at her, faster and harder with each strike. He was testing her, pushing her to the edge. His movements were almost too fast for her to follow, his armor adding to the weight of each blow. Vira's muscles screamed in protest as she blocked and dodged. But she kept going. She had no choice. She had to pass this test. The fight continued for what felt like hours. Vira's body was exhausted, her movements slower than before, but her mind stayed sharp. She watched Ross's movements, noticing the subtle shifts in his stance, the brief moments when his attacks slowed or weakened. It was those moments that she had to find, those small windows of opportunity. Then, as Ross lunged at her with a powerful punch, Vera saw it. The opening. His body was slightly off balance, his left foot not positioned right. It was a small mistake, but it was enough. Vira reacted instantly. She swept his leg from under him, using his own momentum against him. Ross fell to the ground with a heavy thud, his armor clanking as he hit the dirt. For a moment, there was silence. Vera stood over him, her chest heaving with heavy breaths. She couldn't believe it. She had won. She had actually managed to land a successful move against Ross. Ross slowly pushed himself up, a grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with admiration. Well done. Vira's heart raced, but she allowed herself a small smile. She hadn't expected to win, but she had done it. She had passed the test. Ross stood up fully, wiping the dirt from his armor. You've come a long way, Vira. I'm impressed. But Vira wasn't done. She knew there was more to the test than just a single move. What now? She asked, her voice steady despite the exhaustion she felt. Ross's smile faded slightly, his face becoming more serious. Now comes the hardest part, he said. You've shown me that you can control your body, your mind, and your reactions. But there's one final test you need to pass. It's not about strength or speed. It's about your heart. Vira frowned, not fully understanding. What do you mean? Ross took a deep breath, his gaze distant for a moment. In the heat of battle, you'll face more than just physical challenges. You'll face fear, doubt, and the temptation to give up. Those are the real tests. They will break you if you let them. But if you can push through, if you can keep your heart strong when everything seems impossible, then you'll truly be ready for whatever comes next. Vera stood still, taking in his words. She had learned so much about technique and control, but this was something else entirely. It was about resilience, about staying strong even when the world around her was falling apart. It wasn't just about defeating her opponent. It was about defeating the doubts inside her. "I understand," Vera said quietly. Ross nodded, his expression softening. "Good. Now, let's keep going." They continued to spar for the rest of the day. But this time, the fight was different. Vera wasn't just trying to land a blow or defend herself. She was focused on something deeper. She was testing her own limits, pushing through the doubts and fears that had always held her back. She didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but she knew that as long as she stayed true to herself, she could handle whatever came her way. As the sun set behind them, the training ground became quiet once more. Vera stood, exhausted but proud. She had passed Ross's test, but more importantly, she had learned something about herself. She wasn't perfect, but she was stronger than she had ever been. And that was enough. The air was cool as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. Vera stood at the edge of the training ground, looking out over the vast, empty space before her. It was the same place where she had spent countless hours training, learning, and growing. But today felt different. Today was the day she would leave it all behind. Her training with Ross had come to an end. She had learned everything she could from him. How to fight, how to control her emotions, how to push herself beyond her limits. But there was still so much more to learn. The world beyond this training ground was full of unknowns, full of challenges she could not yet imagine. It was time for her to step out and face them head-on. Ross approached her, his armor now clean and polished. He walked slowly, his movements deliberate, as if he knew this moment was coming. He didn't speak right away. He simply stood beside her, both of them looking out at the endless sky. "You've come a long way, Vera," Ross finally said, his voice calm but filled with respect. "When you first arrived, you didn't know what you were getting into. But now," he paused, turning to face her, "now, you're ready." Vera didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She could feel the weight of his words deep inside her. She was ready. She had trained hard, learned from her mistakes, and grown stronger with each passing day. But there was still one last lesson to learn, the most important one of all. Ross looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "The world out there is unpredictable. There will be moments of doubt, of fear, of temptation to give up. But what you've learned here isn't just about fighting. It's about knowing yourself, trusting yourself, and staying true to your heart." Vera nodded slowly, taking in his words. She had learned to control her body and her emotions. She had learned to face challenges with calm and focus. But the most important lesson was this: true strength didn't come from her fists or her speed. It came from within, from the will to keep moving forward, no matter what. "You've taught me so much," Vera said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. "I'll never forget it." Ross smiled, a rare and genuine smile that showed the depth of his pride. "I have no doubt you'll make a difference out there. Just remember, don't let fear control you. Don't let the world make you doubt who you are." Vera looked up at the sky, taking a deep breath. She could feel the weight of her decision, but it didn't scare her. She was ready to leave the safety of the training grounds. She was ready to face the unknown. The world had a way of testing people. It would throw challenges her way, and some of them would be harder than anything she had faced so far. But she was no longer the same person who had first arrived here. She had changed. She had grown. Ross stepped back, giving her space to make her choice. "When you're ready, go. The world will wait for no one." Vera took one last look at the place that had become her second home, then turned and began to walk away. She didn't know where she was going yet, but she knew she was prepared for whatever came next. She was strong, not just because of her training, but because of her belief in herself. As she walked, memories of the past few months flashed in her mind. The challenges, the victories, the moments of doubt and fear, but also the moments of triumph. She had learned that every battle, every fight, was just one part of the bigger picture. Life wasn't about winning or losing. It was about growing, learning, and continuing forward. She had made it this far, and she would continue to make it. Ross watched her go, his eyes steady. He had seen many people come and go, but something about Vera was different. She had the fire inside her. She had the heart. Vera would face the world with courage. She would take what she had learned and build something greater. It wasn't just about the strength of her body. It was about the strength of her spirit. After walking for a while, Vera stopped at the edge of the training grounds. She turned back, one final time, to look at Ross. He was still standing where she had left him, watching her with a quiet, approving gaze. "Thank you," Vera called, her voice carrying in the cool morning air. Ross didn't say anything at first, but then with a nod, he spoke. "You're welcome, Vera. Now go and make your own path." Vera smiled, the weight of his words settling deep inside her. She was no longer a student. She was a warrior, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. She had her heart, her will, and the strength of everything she had learned. And that was enough. With that, Vera turned and walked into the unknown, her steps steady and sure. Whatever came next, she would face it with the strength of a warrior, because she had already learned the most important lesson of all. It wasn't about the fight. It was about the journey. And the journey had just begun.